with special effects not even close to being as good as the 1976 King Kong movie, and all the more, this movie came just months after Star Wars in 1977. Welcome to my channel, KC, that's me, Carrie Chug the Sludge Storyteller, here to talk about a kaiju movie that might be in the public domain, the 1977 movie Yeti, Giant of the 20th Century. In my searches for public domain kaiju movies, I came across this movie on this list, Top 10 Public Domain Kaiju by D. Amador. The thing is, while it states that the production company never renewed copyright in time, I have not been able to find a corroborating source, nor have I pinned down a listed owner. However, while the movie might not be in public domain, the Yeti itself, as a cryptid going back thousands of years, just like ancient mythology, that is public domain. So I decided that it was worth covering this movie the same way I covered Gorgo in a previous video, because worst case scenario, it's a non-public domain movie of a public domain character. Before I get started, please consider giving a like, subscribe, and maybe even the noti bell. Thank you. So, Yeti, Giant of the 20th Century is the result of the coming of Italian filmmakers to set a production shop in Toronto, Canada. For whatever reason, they wanted it to appear to be a Canadian production by listing names more recognizably Canadian. Helmed by Italian director Gianfranco Parolini, but billed as Frank Kramer, it has a lot of King Kong parallels, starting with the character lineup. Morgan Honeycutt, played by Edoardo Faeta, name modified to Eddie Fay, with dubbed dialogue just like the rest of the Italian cast, and essentially the Fred Wilson of the movie, because he sees a golden opportunity in a frozen Yeti recently unearthed from a glacier to organize a giant freak show event promoted by his big oil company. To his credit, he hires an expert on the subject matter, Professor Wasserman, played by Australian-born actor John Stacey, to oversee the project. As he is gradually thawed out, initially we see a King Kong-sized Yeti, until a helicopter lifts him while he's inside the cage, making him look half that size into the air to enable him to adjust to the climate. But while gaining consciousness in the air, he understandably freaks out, and once lowered back to the ground, and of course like any caged wild animal, he starts breaking free, feeling frightened from all the surrounding people and their camouflages. Again, much like King Kong of 1976. Among the spectators, the Andero counterpart, Jane, played by Antonella Interlenghi, billed as Phoenix Grant, also dubbed with a Canadian accent, and her brother Herbie, played by Jim Sullivan, presumably Canadian. I just can't find any source to elaborate more on him, since this is his only movie. Finally, to round out Italians in the main cast, Tony Kendall, birth name Luciano Stella, as Cliff Chandler. I guess we're meant to think that he's this movie's Jack Driscoll until his shady side surfaces later in the movie. The movie hinges heavily on the fleeing wild animal trope, with authorities naturally seeing him as a threat and wanting him destroyed, but also there's a rival oil company working to manipulate those efforts. At that same time, Jane and Herbie are working extremely hard to discourage violence against Yeti, as they call him, having learned firsthand that when not threatened, he's as gentle as they come. Yeti himself is played by Mimo Cryo. Not much on him either. He had small roles in 5 other productions, but as a feral Yeti, he does play this role convincingly. Like the 1976 King Kong, his acting is supplemented by giant props, giant hands, giant feet, but since they didn't have the $4 million in its budget that King Kong used to build a 40-foot robotic ape, it's abundantly evident they used a mock-up in some shots. This one. Hence, more of the major size inconsistency throughout the movie. Since this movie draws heavily from King Kong, there is no surprise that Yeti does some building climbing, only for whatever reason he's not content with placing his feet on window bases, but he has to violently kick through each window his foot reaches, all in the same effort to save Jane from falling to her death. He does manage to make it to the right place before she loses her grip so he can catch her. Not that she would have survived that. And after more urban rampage, Yeti's health starts failing him, with a different climate taking its toll. So Professor Wasserman has him properly oxygenated with a nasal cannula. Since there was no convenient Yeti shrinkage here, I want to know how that thing was manufactured so quickly. Where I'll give the movie credit, in spite of the unconvincing reactions by the cast and all the key happenings, they managed to keep the stakes high with the threats against Yeti from the opposing forces gunning for him, and I myself was satisfied with the resolution. One other thing worth mentioning is that composer Santa Maria Romatelli had scored 19 movies before this, his last one, and while the score at the opening is very impactful, all too similar to Carl Orff's O Fortuna. Overall, in the end, the low-budget B-movie aspects make this something to laugh at in a group watch, and with your expectations lowered by that, you're left with a heartfelt conclusion. At an hour and 41 minutes, a bit longer than your typical 75 to 90 minute guilty pleasure movie, but in my opinion, a worthwhile B-movie watch. But that's my take on Yeti, Giant of the 20th Century. Agree, disagree, something I left out? Please let me know in the comment section. And I'll keep saying it, let's all look for civility amid all the bad news out there about social and political strife. And let's see every new person we meet as a potential friend rather than with suspicion. Everyone be safe, and God bless.